Welcome to the Earth Keepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life, and for many in the Earth Keepers community, that includes our spiritual practices. I'll be co-hosting today's episode with my friend Beth Knox. Beth is the president of the Seattle Sports Commission and a board member of Circlewood, the parent organization of this podcast. Together, we'll be talking to Roger McClendon, executive director of the Green Sports Alliance, an organization that leverages the influence of sports to promote healthy, sustainable communities. According to Roger, sports has the power to unify people and even to help them have common vision to engage big issues like climate change.
Nelson Mandela said it best. Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they understand.
Welcome, friends, to the Earth Keepers podcast. This is going to be a really interesting episode, in great part because I'll be co-hosting with you, Beth. I'm so glad that you can join me today.
This has been a fun opportunity for me to join the podcast today because I am president of the Seattle Sports Commission, and one of our core values is also focusing on environmental sustainability and ensuring that we are helping to play a role in that community and that opportunity to grow and improve. So this is a great chance for us to connect with the Green Sports Alliance as well.
Well, this is going to be fun, and I think we're both going to learn a lot. Roger, welcome to you, friend. We've been looking forward to hanging out with you and gleaning your wisdom. Would you tell us just a bit about Green Sports Alliance and your role in the work that they do?
Absolutely. First of all, it's wonderful to be here to speak to the Earth Keepers audience and to be with Beth and yourself for us. So the Green Sports Alliance is an organization that's about 10 years old, and we are really a sustainability organization that's focused on the nexus between sports and environmental sustainability. And we're composed of two organizations. One is a trade organization, and the other is a foundation, and we kind of work hand in hand. And on the trade organization, the interesting thing is we're composed of all these leagues and teams and sports entities that everybody loves, right? So your favorite teams from the MLB baseball organizations to the minor league teams, think about the hockey and soccer and all the things that are going on, including organizations like ESPN. So the whole infrastructure of sports and those things that are connected to it, we're connected to. And then we focus in on the things that Beth mentioned, the core items of sustainability from the operational side. And then the foundation goes beyond the event or beyond the game, right? And so what are you doing to connect yourself to the community and the broader impact of how we live and work and play together? And so we focus on a lot of those core issues and how we can solve them collaboratively.
So one of our core values in the Earth Keepers community is reflected in the phrase greening everything. And by everything, we mean things like how we work, how we play, what we purchase, how we live together in community. We approach all aspects of our lives with the assumption that there are always changes we can make to live in better relationship to the environment. The relationship between sports and caring for the earth is something that is just not discussed very much, yet clearly it ought to be. So we're looking forward to learning from you, Roger, about some of the ways that you're working to make sports greener, and as an extension of that, greening the organizations and communities that are connected to sports. We're also curious, though, to know about you as a person, so I'd love it if you could help us to understand some of the experiences that have shaped you, maybe the people who have influenced you to become an advocate for the environment as you are.
Obviously, as many of us, those influences come from people that are close to us. So I would say my father, who is a professor of philosophy and history, really instilled in me an earlier critical thinking kind of mindset and approach. And also the importance of, when we think about human rights and justice and equity. And at the same time, my mother was a lover of nature. And so she had pets and always a love for the environment. And she instilled that into me early. And so I had a very good appreciation for those basic kind of things. So I think that gave me the foundation, and I think it was Wild Kingdom. It played all the way up until when I was young, turning on the TV and seeing the world through the lens of the actor. He really brought the reality of being in some far coastal or jungle or region into the living room. And to understand the importance of how wildlife work together and in protecting our ecosystem, that made a real impact on me. And then a couple things happened as I kind of grew older. Things like the Cuyahoga River being on fire as part of Lake Erie, and wondering how can that happen? How can we allow dumping and to get to that point where literally a Great Lake like that connected to a Great Lake is on fire? And I know that happened maybe in the late 60s and early 70s. And then we think about even things up to today, like Flint and in the water issues that we see there that impact the whole community. So all those things really made a big impact and really influenced my thinking.
So let me ask you, how would you describe your relationship to the environment, to nature, now in the present day?
I'm definitely a believer that there's a higher purpose and that we're here to serve others. And so that servant leadership is really important, and that it's something about being in harmony with others. So the biggest part, most people think about changing light bulbs when they think about sustainability, the LED, but it's really about people. How do we really, in harmony with nature, preserve and maximize the potential of people? And I think that's something that I'm really passionate about.
It's interesting that you say that. A lot of people draw a hard line between the realm of the environment and nature on one side, and the realm of people and social concerns on the other. It sounds though like you don't see that sort of division. I gather from what you're saying that it's all part of a whole. So am I hearing you correctly?
Absolutely. And I think it's a little bit of a stretch from my days here at the Green Sports Alliance, because I think it was really focused on operations and around what we could do with technology and reduce our impacts and save money on energy and those kind of things. But one of the leadership principles that I brought to the board before taking the role was this whole importance of the social aspect of sustainability, right? So it needs to be both. And when we think about that higher framework from the United Nations around the Sustainable Development Goals, we really start to think about these things. And traditionally, we were focused on the food, value chain, transportation, water, and the venues, renewable energy. But when you think about expanding that mission and vision to think about the Sustainable Development Goals, you get to no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, reducing inequality, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnerships for goals. So there's a framework and a structure that brings us in as a global community, and it begins to make sense, right? And so, yeah, I'm really excited about how do we bring that to life, but that's our expanded mission and vision that starts from thinking about people and how we relate to the earth.
Tell us a little bit about the core values of the Green Sports Alliance that informs your approach to creation care and environmental sustainability.
Yeah, I do think it starts a bit about our practices and what we do every day and what our beliefs are. And those beliefs are, I kind of mentioned a few, that equality component and thinking about others and that empathy that you have to have. And then thinking the business side of that, how do I manage that within a business framework, is that you don't sacrifice those values, right? You figure it out. You come up with innovation and technology to figure it out, but you don't sacrifice the quality of the working environment to make sure it's safe and healthy. As we think about the 3 global pandemics that I'll get into, you think about the gender equality and opportunity for people to grow and be promoted and be recognized for their contributions. And then also you think about, as I'm doing my business, what is my environmental stewardship, which is the core of how I operate my business and the investments I need to make in technology to ensure that I'm doing those things in the right way that trickles down into the benefit of the community. So I think all those things you start to kind of bundle together as part of your value proposition with the same challenge of making sure it works for the business as well.
that alignment is so critical that they all interconnect and play off of each other. So now share with us the rationale and connection between sports and this mission and Earth Care.
Here's where I think it becomes exciting. When you think about the question, what does sport have to do with sustainability? Where is the nexus? Well, you think about food and all the people that come and to experience what sports have to offer. There's a huge component about the value chain. And when I talk about value chain, is how do you get all those operating systems, whether it be the food and the beverages and all those things you have coming in, the transportation, people getting in and out, all those things impact that footprint that we talk about. The other side of sports is around not just the operational venue part, but it's around the ability of sport to transcend everything. And Nelson Mandela said it best. Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they understand. And when you think about being able to transcend gender, to transcend race, to transcend ethnicity and age, and really politics, which kind of tend to divide us, right? And religion, whether you believe in this or believe in that, everybody kind of comes to support their team. And I think that's what the power of sport has. It has that ability to inspire and bring people together.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I think what would help us at this stage, Roger, is to take this concept of that nexus between sports and environmental sustainability and share with us some practical examples where it has been played out.
When we think about those dynamics of sustainability, and a lot of people have been environmentally trained, we talk about the Clean Water Act in the 70s, early 70s maybe, and to kind of push that to where sports has the opportunity to figure that out is the execution of changing my lighting in a facility not only drives money to the bottom line, but it also is very human centric. I mean, it makes you feel different when you have the right lighting. It makes you sleep better when you have the right lighting. So some of our innovation is a key to how we're going to get to the solutions when we think about these global crises and global pandemics, is understanding that there's a lot of benefits outside of just the cost savings that a lot of the CFOs are interested in, but it improves the quality of life. And so we were able to leverage Plan LED as one of the folks that had that technology, and the human-centric lighting went into MLB and some other stadiums. And think about how nervous those batters were, right? I'm hitting 300 now. I don't want you to change my lighting because all of a sudden that might drop my batting percentage. But what they found was it actually improved the experience for everybody. And based on that, that was a great example. And then once we had that best practice, everybody got more comfortable and we had the data and everybody started to expand and accelerate those kind of changes.
I just have to add an interesting note that I have a friend who is working in the prison systems to change lighting as well, to see how that changes the behavior of the inmates and improve how they are interacting, how they are setting goals, et cetera. And so far, it's proving your point that it makes a dramatic difference in their quality of life.
Discovering those nuggets is really important and vital. And so that was just one example. There's others where we go outside the field itself. And even within that example, where we took that technology and then collaborated through the foundation to figure out how do we get that into schools? How do you get it into nonprofits? And then thinking about the community. How do you take concepts like solar and community solar and get it to where it's needed so that we can help individuals that may be in a lower socioeconomic situation and not have to spend 30 to 40% of their income on a monthly basis towards utilities. So I think that's where the broader impact can come from these kind of projects and concepts.
Do you have any other examples or stories where sports organizations, whether it's a venue or a team or even a sports commission, has actually carried out some of these changes and had that positive impact occur?
Yeah, I can talk about ESPN, which is a really good partner, and they started their ESPYs, where they recognize the best of the best in sports. And we started early with them to help, from an advisory standpoint, understand how to green their signature events and how to go to zero waste. And so that meant going back to the supply chain and understand where's the compostability of those the packaging that you need to bring in house. What are the things you need to do as you're putting on your event to minimize to the point where you can get close to zero and make those things what I call compostable or recyclable or reusable. So taking those concepts, we've been able to move those types of events to zero waste or close to zero waste as we move forward and gain more and more understanding of technology. And one core part of technology, when we think about single-use plastic reduction as a part of sustainability and waste diversion through landfills, which, as we understand, if you have food waste and things going into landfills, it creates a methane gas, which is 21 times the global warming potential of just regular CO2. So that is a major issue that we have to face. And so those examples, we've leveraged the new products through bioplastics that can be reused or recycled has been a big innovation. And making sure that infrastructure is there to carry that out is probably the next step across the board that we need to work on.
Beth, I'm wondering what you're thinking as you hear Roger talk about these initiatives and innovations. As you think about the work that you do and the civic and sports organizations that you interact with, are you finding inspiration in what Roger's talking about?
Absolutely. And I think the thing that came to mind most vividly is that opportunity to be deliberate with the partners that we work with, that supply chain, to ensure that we are partnering with organizations that have the same values. And I know from previous experience in my early days of producing sports and events, that wasn't a consideration. And now it's a priority, and it ultimately it can make it so much more efficient and easier for you to execute and fulfill the goals of being environmentally conscious when you have partners who are playing into that and contributing to it. Roger, how would you advise our listeners who are connected with individuals who may not value the earth care and opportunities to make a difference? How would you provide guidance to them to engage those who don't necessarily share that value?
I think you start with thinking about the next generation and thinking about our children and thinking about, our grandparents and figure out, just like when we think about COVID, what do we need to do to keep each other safe? And so having that common ground of those real fundamental values are important, not to push it on everybody, but I think people value health. I think people value clean water and clean air. And so if we can start by talking about those things that matter to them as much as it matters to us and the sustainability and longevity of the human race, these things are not US based. These are global, universal, humanitarian perspectives that I think we can have a common ground on. And once people have that foundation, then we can talk about the execution side. What does that look like? And I think that's where creative innovation comes in. I think about Tesla as that breakthrough vehicle is because they didn't push necessarily on that it's electric or EV. They pushed on performance. And so I think when we have brands and businesses like that to understand that the future is about putting these things at the forefront of our design and understanding the value back to the consumer, we're going to go a long way to move to a more sustainable future.
I love the idea of finding that common ground with people and use that as the starting point. And from there, do you have suggestions on practical actions that we can take or that our friends or even those who are still figuring this out, what things can they do from an action standpoint?
I think educating yourself. What does sustainable agriculture really mean? What is it to have those best practices so that we minimize our impact? So I think that education is first. And then as you become more aware, if you're in a state where solar has been a big opportunity, you can start to play around with that kind of stuff. Can I reduce my energy bill and provide some value back into my income? And again, I think that's really important because that's what I care about. And then the compostability, how I'm looking at products, choices I make on products that I buy or companies that I support. When we had apartheid, and to really help with the issues that we saw in South Africa, the fact of not going to that gas station with that brand on it because they had investment in apartheid in South Africa actually started to make an impact, right? So we vote with our dollars a lot of times. And so I think people can do that. They can say, if the brand doesn't have the right values and it's not doing the right thing, why am I buying that product when company B does? So I'm going to go with company B. So those are the things that we can continue to do is live it, learn it, and then practice it.
And those decisions circle back to your first advice about education. We can't make wise and impactful choices if we don't understand the issues or have a sense of what's at stake. And that, of course, really requires that we do our homework. I had to admit that until I talked to you, Roger, I didn't think much at all about the connection between sports and earthkeeping. Yet if I wanted to do my homework about, say, the environmental commitments of one of my local sports teams, or maybe about the environmental impact of a sports venue in my region, how could I actually go about learning about such things?
We love to celebrate the success of the teams, and we try to do that through recommunicating the story and storytelling and sharing that information in our channels through social media, LinkedIn, even sharing those stories, and through our newsletter. And I think what's important is that as a fan or wanting to understand in your community what those teams are doing, they're starting to do that even more, right? And so one example was what the Super Bowl was able to do. They actually put in this last Super Bowl in Miami, their NFL Green team kind of helped spearhead their whole sustainability strategy around, looking at the ecosystem in Miami. What was important for Miamians and the folks, and that's the coast, and that's the reef that has been destroyed over time. And so trying to rebuild the reef, working with partners, and the NFL getting right behind that to share that experience and that storytelling with millions of fans puts that in their mind that that's important. Now, what can I do? I might not even be a sports fan when I kind of hear that commercial that comes on in the Super Bowl, and it's Anheuser-Busch talking about their natural and how they're working with farmers and trying to make sure that they're doing their part in sustainability. So the power of sport now has a power to influence that supply chain that makes that circular, what we call the circular economy methodology work, where it's not a just make and dispose, a linear approach. It's really make, reuse, and make again, and then keep it out of the landfill, right? And so I think that's really the power that sports has.
Hey friends, we've been in conversation with Roger McClendon of Green Sports Alliance. As you know, becoming a better friend to the earth involves educating ourselves about environmental issues and discovering ways to make a difference through our actions. If you want to learn more about the intersection of earthkeeping and sports, be sure to check out the website for the Green Sports Alliance at www.greensportsalliance.org. There you'll find an option to subscribe to their newsletter, so you can keep up to date on their latest projects. And if you want to reach out to Roger with questions or comments, his email address is roger@greensportsalliance.org. So, if you found anything challenging or inspiring in this episode so far, be sure to access these resources to learn more. Now back to our conversation with Roger McClendon. As we're talking, Roger and Beth, I find that our talk about these big systemic issues is opening up my perspective to challenges and solutions that I've not considered before. I do appreciate the way that Green Sports Alliance gives to working at the systemic level of teams and corporations and organizations. At the same time, I find that I'm curious about the impact of your work, Roger, on a more personal level, about how your work might be helping to change people's hearts and minds when it comes to environmental responsibility. I love that quote that you gave us earlier from Nelson Mandela to help us understand that sports has the power to build bridges and to unify people. I think, too, that sports has the potential to break down defenses and to help people to be more open to new perspectives. Do you find, Roger, that in your work, the intersection of sports and advocacy, that sports fans or even the coaches and players are being helped to see the environment and environmental challenges in new ways?
I think so. I think it is happening not just of our organization, but you hit on some things that value equation goes into the players themselves, the coaches themselves. And so what you're seeing is, and unfortunately it's taking some time, but people are fearful to put their personal views and having their opinions on how society should act. And so, but there have been players that have sacrificed and done that, from Muhammad Ali, who stood up in a time of what he felt was an unjust war for people that weren't really should have been engaged in it, and he paid a price for that. They stripped him of his title. They actually was going to persecute him and imprison him, right? And then as recently as Colin Kaepernick taking a knee or a stand from an unjust situation, which that was years ago, right? And then what we just saw with George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and where I'm from, Breonna Taylor, right here in Louisville, is that there's something that is broken in our system. And it stems from this systemic racism that we talk about that's over 400 years in the making, that we have to address. And sports can bring that about as far as awareness. And in our hearts of hearts, we recognize that there is a need to be just and change some things that are causing these systemic issues that kind of come to forefront. The sports figures like LeBron James talking about Black Lives Matter, not negating that all Black Lives matter, but based on the statistics, Black lives don't matter. And that was the whole point of bringing that up. We do care about everybody, but there's an issue here. And so when we think about that social and the individualism of standing up for values, it really is about a lot about the players that have the power to have a voice to do that.
I think that here again you're blurring the boundaries between environmental issues and social justice issues. I'd love to know more about this and tell us more about why we shouldn't think of them as separate categories. In your view, what does environmental justice have to do with social justice?
Environmental justice is very much related to social justice and the issues that we see, because we know the statistics are the folks that are lower on the social economic scale, typically of different racial makeup, the minority, are the folks that have suffered through what we call environmental justice. Where are the pollutants put? Where is the air quality level in some of these areas? And we significantly, through the data, see that significantly the correlation is for those folks that can't have the power to push back and push on those things to make sure that those things are happening. Now, I think it'll get to a root cause of, where's the regulation and how do we manage those things, and doing a much better job of doing that. But there is a trend. And so as it comes to how do sports teams respond to that, I think we all have a responsibility. And so this is where corporate social responsibility, when you think about going back to those SDGs and frameworks that we use, there's something called ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance, that is through large institutional asset managers like BlackRock that owns trillions of dollars of value in corporations. And they have measurement systems that understand that it's just not about the environment. It's around these social things, diversity and inclusion, gender on your board and in your ranks of leadership. All those things need to be compiled. And the companies that do the best, typically there's a correlation between them performing better, having better returns, and managing risk, and to be a better company if they're managing those kind of things. So there's pressures from and information from those organizations to kind of help drive those things. But that's the relationship that I see is it really is a responsibility of owners and corporations to really own up to this environmental and social conversation in context to sustainability.
Before we went on the air, Roger, we talked a bit about the pandemic and the effect that it's having on everyone's work. You said something then that disturbed me in a good way about COVID-19 being just one of several pandemics. You described climate change as a second pandemic and institutional racism as a third.
COVID-19 is really a test for our leadership, right? It was a test for our global collaboration, and it's still a test for how we respond within communities from state to state and city to city. And the more we can be aligned and the more we can support each other, and simple things like mask wearing, social distancing, those things matter. But it matters if they don't do it, but you do it, then then you don't get the result you want. So you have to be unified. And I think when we think about the other pandemic to be unified is about the global pandemic of climate change. We can't look in isolation. we have to think about it in holistically in context of how we operate and work together and the values that we have. And so that's why it's very important to talk about Black Lives Matter and what's happened, talk about gender equality, talk about sustainable city infrastructure and not just what's at the stadium, to connect all this together, because then we'll be a better community, we'll be a better city, we'll be better humanitarians across the board when we can connect this globally.
When it comes to this third pandemic of institutional racism, what are some of the core issues that collectively and as individuals we need to acknowledge and understand in order to even begin to work for change?
I'm going to step into my dad's space, my father, Dr. John H. McClendon, and I'm actually reading from his book, and it's about African-American philosophers and philosophy. But let me go back and this how he defines or how racism is defined, so we can kind of understand it. Racism is not just an attitude or belief, social consciousness. There exist superior and inferior races. It's not just that. It's more importantly, it is a behavior of social practices and institutions which have those social relationships, which lend material support to such beliefs by the actual suppression of the supposed inferior group. So if you just believe something, that's fine. But when you have institutions that say, well, you can't get a house here, or you can't move here, or you can't get a job, or more blatantly, put a knee on your neck for 9 minutes and whatever, 40 something seconds, and think it's okay with your hands in your pocket. That's what we're talking about. That's an institution carrying out an act of power against someone who's powerless. And so for us to address it, you have to, first of all, identify and empathize that it exists. The institutions that we talk about, unfortunately, when we think about democracy and how we started, it goes all the way back to that compromise, right? And so we're working our way through it. Let's be honest, and we're not pointing fingers, because we have people that believe that we should be a democracy and everybody from women to men to no matter what your color, you should be based on your merit. But we have a long way to go for how that is actually executed based on statistics. We talked about the criminalization. And so I'll reference another documentary that I would highly recommend you see. It's called 13th, if you haven't seen it. And it's about the 13th Amendment. And the 13th Amendment was supposedly to abolish slavery. If you read the 13th Amendment, you have all the rights unless you are a criminal, then you forfeit your rights. So that played a big role into how people addressed and related to others to criminalize people. And mass incarceration in this country and privatization of prison systems are for profit. There's no incentive to try to rehab and get people to do the right thing when you actually make profit by bringing more people in. So those things we can look at statistically and go back and see the trends that we do have a challenge here and we have to address it and face it.
In terms of the COVID pandemic, most people are beginning to have some hope these days that things will get back to normal. There might be less hope around the pandemic of climate change, though this podcast is meant to be a cry of hope against climate despair. But what about this third pandemic of systemic racial injustice? Where do you find yourself on the spectrum between despair and hope concerning that issue?
I despair that my son or daughter may be pulled over by someone that's supposed to help them, and then all of a sudden it turns into something that's not. And we've seen that happen. But I think beyond just that personal, really kind of getting to what I think is important for everyone is managing this effect of greed and lack of empathy for humanity is something that we really need to figure out, right? It's not about color or race. It's really more about a social dynamic. So I think that's really what keeps me up at night is how do we really become a better world around these issues?
I really appreciate the generosity and inclusiveness of your words and the way that you talk about inequality as a collective issue. But I also feel compelled to acknowledge what you said about your children and your fears for them. While we do indeed share responsibility for the broad issues, we can also come alongside you in your particular experience of injustice. Your despair about how your children are treated is my despair. If it's a problem for them, it's a problem for me. It's a problem for all of us, frankly. So to hear you speak about your experiences of injustice, it really upsets me, but I think in a good way that I ought to be upset.
I appreciate that comment. I really do. I know I'm not alone in understanding these three global pandemics and that people do have empathy and want to make things right. And so that brings me great encouragement. The other thing that brings me encouragement is thinking about the next generation and how smart these folks are. They're very diverse. I mean, you could go from A to Z on all kinds of different differences that they have. For some reason, that generation has this connectivity that I don't think I have in my generation, and it's because of the social media, it's because they've grown up with that phone, and they support each other. And so when one's feeling down, this whole kind of community of their group kind of reinforces that support. So I hope that can transcend where we are now and bring what we need to do as far as making these decisions for the betterment of everyone to the forefront. So I'm very optimistic about what we call playing for the next generation. And that's our next decade of work, is to really engage the youth, to bringing them into these conversations, and really just to listen, because I think they have the answers.
We've been talking to Roger McClendon of Green Sports Alliance. If you want to know more about Roger's work, please go to the show notes on our podcast website at www.circlewood.online/earthkeepers. And if you want to leave a note or ask a question about this episode, or anything really, you can leave a quick voice message through the link on the podcast website, and I'll be sure to get back to you. Earthkeepers Podcast explores ways in which we can change ourselves, our communities, and our cultures to help us to care for the earth in holistic and regenerative ways. Through curated conversations, we highlight the wisdom of thought leaders and change agents who are making a difference and showing us a way forward. When Earthkeepers stand together, they amplify the impact of their resistance against environmental injustice and multiply their efforts for renewal and restoration. I am Forrest Inslee, your podcast host. Our executive producer is James Amadon. Our producer is Dave Olfers. Forrest Reed is our editor and the creator of our original music. Our research assistant is Rochelle Nordman, and Jesselyn Megerly is our social media director. Thank you, friends, for listening, and please join us next time on the Earthkeepers Podcast.